The euphoric recall is your enemy. It makes the rumination worse. It makes you doubt yourself, and at this point now you're gaslighting yourself. Make that ick list. Remind yourself this was not pretty. Remind yourself of all the other stuff that happened. So today's proverb is, hope dies last. Now, this proverb was actually sent in as an email by somebody who reported it was a German proverb or idiom. And they pointed out that this, hope dies last, is different than the more common English version that we use, and those of us who speak English as a primary language, of hope springs eternal. And they are right. That proverb of hope springs eternal actually has its origins in the writing of Alexander Pope. But I like this saying a little bit better, that hope dies last, because I think it cuts to the chase in a more useful way for understanding narcissism. So what does this saying, what does this proverb, hope dies last, mean for narcissism and narcissistic abuse? Like I said, it cuts to the chase of why people get stuck. I have often spoken about the key factors that keep people stuck in narcissistic relationships: fear, guilt, pity, lack of information, still loving the person, money, children, and hope. It is probably better to call it misplaced hope or unrealistic hope or misguided hope, but at the end of the day, it is hope. And what is the hope for? Hope for change. Hope that the promises will be kept. Hope that things could get better. Hope that the future fakes finally come true. In a narcissistic relationship, this saying could not have more truth. The fact is, a lot of people get stuck because hope indeed does die last. There are lots of reasons for this. Trauma bonding means a complex life comprised of justifications and rationalizations and creating reasons to stay in the relationship. This is a pattern that often got set in childhood and can extend to adult relationships. Sometimes the people around you foster this sense of hope and tell you that they have seen this one or this difficult person change, and that to give up hope of change, well, that's just defeatist or negative. You end up getting sort of painted as a sort of negative Nelly if you suggest that things in a given situation just can't change. And if you spent an entire childhood hoping a parent would change, hoping that things would get better, then you know what it feels like to live in long-term hope, especially when it comes to toxic situations. There is a very human piece to this. To give up on hope can really feel like falling into the abyss, a bit like losing faith. It doesn't feel good. Hope keeps us going, and with the hope gone, then what? Because so many people in narcissistic relationships have completely lost faith in themselves, view themselves as being not enough, have lost their self-esteem. To lose hope in the relationship can, and having little faith in themselves, means that to lose hope really feels like falling into the abyss. It flies in the face of almost all world religious beliefs and traditions, and of every feel-good motivational message you've ever seen. You're not supposed to give up on hope, right? So while hope does spring eternal and does die last in narcissistic relationships, it hangs by a thread throughout the relationship. In fact, that is the challenge of the narcissistic relationship. You will have multiple days when the hope fades more and more and more, and then one day the hope gets rejuvenated because you and the narcissist have a good day, a happy evening, a connected moment. Then hope gets on more firm footing, and the whole cycle begins again. There is that penny drop moment in all narcissistic relationships when the hope does die. It looks different in every relationship. Sometimes it happens when the ultimate betrayal of trust happens. I don't know, an infidelity, or they put a child in harm's way, or get arrested and destroy the family's finances. In those cases, the hope that was already teetering and fragile finally drops. Sometimes it is the behavior of the narcissist when you are sick. You assumed that even though they weren't good, useful in the day-to-day, when the rubber really met the road and life got serious and you got sick, you believed that they would actually finally appreciate you. At that point, you realize they don't, and then hope dies. You believe that as they get older and you help them out and you take care of them, they will finally thank you and apologize for the pain they caused you and so many others throughout your life. Nope. And then the hope dies. It could be the day that their anger and rage continue to escalate and they finally lay hands on you or physically threaten you. Then the hope dies. But sadly, the hope does not die, even when there's physical violence in too many cases. So there is that moment. Sometimes people test the narcissist, wanting to keep hope alive. They will put conjectures to them. What if someday I got sick, or you only had a year to live, or something like that? The answer is usually pretty bleak. And then hope dies. It looks different in every case, but it tends to be the last thing to die in a narcissistic relationship. Lots of people will say they can't unsee what they saw in the relationship. There is a point where to go back feels like giving up on themselves. And in more than a few cases, some people stay even after hope has died. It happens. But maybe they stay with a more realistic assessment of the situation, realistic expectations, and radical acceptance. In a narcissistic relationship, this proverb, that hope dies last, is not a proverb. It almost feels like a truism. And in an ideal world, you will find hope in far better places than this narcissistic relationship, like places like yourself, and the good and respectful and reciprocal spaces in your life. Lots of you were in this kind of relationship I'm about to talk about until you weren't, okay? So in this relationship, everything's fine. Everything's good. We're good. You would go to bed confused as hell, replaying conversations in your mind, but really you told yourself, oh, this is just marriage. This is just relationships. This is just how families are. Some days, every so often, you'd have one of those crises of confidence, but on most days, you would just soldier through and everything was fine. This is the denial-based narcissistic relationship. There are so many reasons for this denial-based kind of narcissistic relationship. One could be a person is surrounded by other narcissistic relationships. And obviously, if everything around you is a certain way, then it's almost impossible to discern that this kind of relationship is an issue. Or it could be that there's a person who's an enabler in one of these relationships and they just want to maintain the status quo. Or a person who really literally doesn't know that narcissism is a thing. Or a person who doesn't want to believe that narcissism is a thing. And I have encountered these people, and some of them are even people I know. And they've said things to me like, okay, Ramani, I get that this is what you do for a living, but this really isn't a thing, and you're just bitter about stuff that happened to you. Really? Needless to say, my boundaries have gone up with those people. But I am sure you know or have been this kind of person, right? It's a bit of a riff on the Pollyanna of it all. Like, this isn't a thing, right? Now, these kinds of denial-based relationships may exist for cultural reasons. And again, back to that idea of wanting to maintain the status quo of toxic relationships, and many other people in your family system or your community may be in these kinds of relationships. And Again, the culture sort of supports them, so it becomes a sort of collective denial. Everybody's in it. Now, the denial-based narcissistic relationship actually accounts for a large proportion of narcissistic relationships. In fact, many people currently in these kinds of relationships, I don't think they'll be watching this video because, frankly, they don't think or may not want to think that anything is wrong in their relationship. But they may have their dark nights of the soul when they are confused as hell and may stumble into this very YouTube channel late at night as they try to make sense of it, and then the next day go back to denial. Now, one of the greatest challenges of relationships in general, and not just narcissistic relationships, is that many people love the idea of a relationship they are in, the idea of a family, and have a vision of what they wish it and hope or want it to be, and will break their hearts to try to make it look the way they want it to. They will organize everyone for that perfect holiday picture or the Mother's Day brunch or the family vacation, and it will be a sheer misery. Everyone complaining and gaslighting and manipulating, but that person who loves the idea of it all will fight to make it work until their heart breaks. They desperately want it to look the way they want a family to look. And so when the people within that family are treating them badly, they will just engage in denial, because at least the idea can stay afloat. Now, under those circumstances, acknowledgement of narcissism is messy. It means not just acknowledging that a partner is narcissistic, but also that they will never change. The holiday picture will always be a smiling semi-fiction. The holiday dinners are tolerated with seething contempt under the surface. The vacation is a sort of psychological lost weekend where everyone was miserable. Ultimately, the denial type relationship is about cognitive dissonance, trying to make the pieces fit, justifying and rationalizing and denying. Everything's fine, we're good, everything's great. A sort of fake Instagram narrative of family happiness, while this person in the relationship is actually shrinking into a shell of themselves because of the relationship. It's actually quite sad. The person in this relationship is trying so hard and are getting so hurt that they just start to get hollowed out. A few months ago, I talked with someone about a denial type relationship. Super sweet wife, very narcissistic husband. He was self-righteous and communal with some top notes of vulnerable narcissism sprinkled on top. 2 kids, adult kids, one narcissistic, one very anxious. The mother just wanted happy. She just wanted happy little vacations and happy family portraits and happy meals together. Not happy meals, happy meals, like let's be happy at the meal. You get it, right? She just wanted cuddle time on the couch with her husband and just to be a little bit cherished and desired and loved. She didn't need or want much beyond that. She just wanted them all to get along and to not be invalidated. It was not happening. It was impossible to get through to this woman because she was so entrenched in this denial distortion for a variety of reasons, but would have these troughs of sadness in her life when things would get so bad in these relationships, but she still couldn't or wouldn't understand the narcissism part. She would just cry about what was wrong in the relationship. So even when the dots were being connected by yours truly, nope, she couldn't hear it. She's a really nice person, so it was hard to watch, but she's in a denial relationship. As I said, there are lots of relationships like this. What ends up pushing them to the tipping point? Who knows? Sometimes it's infidelity, financial abuse. The narcissistic person themselves may leave one day. Maybe there's really bad public behavior. Someone else may be saying something to them. Children get older. In some cases, it's just a straw and a camel's back scenario. Being invisible just gets to be too much, something I'm hoping for with that really nice lady. I tread lightly on the denial relationships when I work with them clinically. If I push too hard, the client may go underground and say, I don't want to talk about this anymore. and then I'd lose the opportunity to at least be a support to them as they figure things out. But it can be really painful to witness these relationships, for example, if you're a friend. And the denial relationship people can actually be enablers themselves because they're trying to keep a leaky boat afloat themselves. You may find your patience being tested if this is your friend or someone close to you. Hearing the sad stories, witnessing the toxic relationship, and then your friend just sort of glossing it all over during a honeymoon period and saying, oh, it's all fine. And again, the cycle starts again. If you are in a denial relationship and got out, well done, because that was not easy. Because it really meant giving up on a lot of beliefs, and that is never an easy thing to do. If you are still in one and you are watching this, don't feel you have to address your relationship on someone else's schedule. You'll get there when the time is right. Recognizing it is a huge first step. Now, things I'd suggest include journaling, watching the patterns in the relationship, getting into therapy, preparing for grief, understanding your own relationship history before this, as well as understanding your family history, learning about cognitive dissonance, and above all else, recognize that this isn't your fault. Wanting to be happy is not a bad thing, but denial can be dangerous. What is the line between empathy and justification? This line, this demarcation, is something that so many people who want to avoid or manage the narcissistic people in their lives struggle with. And definitely people who are in these relationships and getting out of them struggle with this as well. And even people who are trying to gatekeep and not get into these relationships. What is the line between empathy and justification? So let's try this out a few ways. Story number 1. You meet someone new. This new person you've just met is complaining about their unfair life, how difficult their life is, and a lot of it's true. And you offer them empathy. You say things like, that sounds really hard, I'm so sorry. They keep complaining. You even offer to pick up the check, even though you have your own money woes, since they are having such a hard time, and they respond with, well, thanks. I guess this is the one good thing that's going to happen to me today. But knowing my life, I better not get used to it. Now, you know they have been down on their luck. They just need to vent. But even as you get to know them, they never ask about you. But you tell yourself, they're going through so much. And maybe you're the one who's being selfish for thinking they should care about your life. Because, golly, this person is going through a lot. And why should they need to think about you? What's happening there? Empathy or justification? Let's take on another one. You work with someone. They keep putting more and more stuff at work on you. And they say things like, my kid is sick, then their car breaks down, then they say they're tired after their vacation, or they have a bad marriage, on and on, whatever their story is. You may not have those problems right now, and you recognize that their relationship problems and life problems are tough, and that they have just had a tough go of it balancing a long commute and children. More than once, you offer to stay late and take care of whatever had to get done at the workplace. This is happening more and more. And you tell them that you know how hard things are for them, and you say, what can I do to help? You yourself, though, you also have stuff on your plate, but not as much as them. That's what you tell yourself. So you keep doing it. You keep staying late. The one time, though, you're in a tough spot and you need someone to have your back at work, they say, that's your job. Why should I do it? And you don't push back on that. Empathy or justification? Let's try another. You're in a long-term relationship with a narcissist, and the invalidation and all the rest of it are getting to you. But your partner just lost their job again for behaving like an ass again. It's been so many years, you've had kids, your kids are grown, but you feel bad because your partner's getting older and won't get a job that pays decently or is secure. And oh no, how are they going to land on their feet? And maybe you can just give it another chance. They are more angry than ever because of the job. And so the emotional abuse is at a high point. But you feel bad for them and don't want to have a deeper conversation with them. Empathy or justification? Let's try one more. Your elderly narcissistic parent has been terrible to you for your entire life, and has burned most of the family bridges. So nobody is willing to step up, and your parent is getting older and sicker. Their apartment is looking like a hoarded mess, and something needs to be done. You want to just move them to an assisted living center. That's not bad, but that's in their town, but you feel bad about it. You think, well, I don't want to die alone like this either. Were they really that bad? You move out to where they live for a little while to help out, care for them, and extend yourself financially because you feel so bad for them. You feel sad for them being left alone there, but they refuse to be moved to be closer to your home, and they just expect you to help them where it works for them in their house, and they continue to verbally abuse you. What are we looking at here? Empathy or justification? So as you can see, there is a blurred space where the empathy hits the justification. And that right there, that spot, is the struggle of every narcissistic relationship. Empathy means being emotionally present, understanding the emotional experience of another person, being self-aware of what we say or do. So feeling bad about someone's difficult life and hearing their complaints, helping out the unfortunate coworker, feeling sad for what awaits the down and out narcissistic partner after many years, and the grief and solicitude about the elderly, abusive narcissistic parent, frankly, all of that is empathy. So what's the justification part? The new person you met complains and doesn't listen to you because they have a hard life and you just let it go. The coworker isn't addressing their structural issues in their life and instead making their problem your problem, and then they don't help you when they can and you let it go or write it off to them having a hard life. The long-term partner is raging at you just as they always have, and you let them off the hook because they're getting older and more unemployable. The elderly parent still feels entitled to what they want from you, and you feel guilty for not staying with them. The justification is the rationalizing of their bad behavior and making it your problem. Understanding the difficult circumstances and the challenges of that and mirroring them back to someone, empathy. Enduring their bad treatment and listening to the same complaints, not being seen or heard, working harder and it not being reciprocal, being verbally abused and extending yourself physically, emotionally, and financially for someone who has never been there and doesn't care that they are inconveniencing you, all of that is toxic justification. And it's in this blurred spot that most people who get sucked into and stuck in narcissistic relationships struggle with. If I feel bad for someone, shouldn't I do something? Up to a point, yeah. Sure, you can listen, but when it's the same complaining, aggrieved, refusing to take responsibility carousel, then at some point, it's about letting that person pull on their big kid pants, be an adult, take ownership of their lives, and manage it. Whether that means them going into therapy, getting a babysitter, moving. The justification empathy issue comes down to the core issue in narcissistic relationships. You have empathy for them. They have none for you. I'm the narcissist here. You can listen to me whine and complain. You can do my work for me. You can tolerate my emotional abuse because I'm a failure and can't keep a job. You can upend your life to take care of me because I planned badly. All of that is a manifestation of their lack of empathy towards you. When one person has empathy and the other does not, and you stick around in that situation, you do need to justify their behavior to stay in it. You keep saying things like, oh, they're going through a tough time, or they don't mean it, or they're old and alone, and it becomes bad for you. Empathy cannot be a one-way street. This is why disengagement and boundary setting and realistic expectations become so important. The complaining, not listening new person we talked about, well, those are low stakes when it's a new relationship. That person needs to get therapy, a life coach, and a grip. And that isn't yours to fix. The risks of getting stuck because you want to rescue that new person and feel that empathy is dangerous. That coworker, That coworker needs to clean up their life. You aren't a social worker, and it does suck for them. You could even try to advocate for them, see if you can work with management on flex time or on-site childcare or remote work, but at the end of the day, that person needs to take responsibility. You can stop making excuses for them. Stop justifying. What about that long-term partner who is raging at you and can't hold a job? That's never going to change. You staying may lift the initial sense of guilt at either leaving or setting firm boundaries with someone who is basically an emotional toddler, but they could get themselves into therapy and at least make a good faith attempt at being better, but they won't. Maybe you can't even afford to leave because of their bad financial management, but at a minimum, see the situation clearly. That elderly parent, yes, maybe their mental faculties are slipping, but do you owe them something? I don't know that anyone owes anyone anything, but beyond that philosophical statement, if that parent is capable of moving and you want to stretch yourself to make their life possible by living near them, that's too big an ask if they could actually meet you where you're at. You have the ability to reject that or set up a hybrid you can live with without still being the 4-year-old child who is still trying to please this unpleasable parent who feels entitled to you sacrificing your life for them. And yes, you may need to withstand the disapproval of enabling family members who don't want this to be their problem. Laying down boundaries with narcissists is difficult because it is uncomfortable. And in some ways, capitulating and giving in and putting up with the narcissistic behavior is easier than the guilt and anxiety that come from saying no. When empathy hurdles into justification, that is when the relationship becomes bad for you. The ability to say, I do feel bad for them, but this isn't mine to fix, that's the key. Narcissistic abuse means your empathy comes up against a cruel adult's unwillingness to take responsibility and their vampire-like willingness to suck up your empathy, your rescuing. You are justifying the discomfort this relationship is causing on the basis of the victimized and sad backstories they give you. And there is no reciprocal support from them. You listen to them, they listen to you. That's not happening. When that happens, that's the day it veers into the lane of toxic justification. And that road can go for thousands of miles and a lifetime of being an emotional punching bag as well as a lifetime of regret. Stick with empathy and expect adults to be responsible for their own shit. Nobody's life is so bad that they can't do some of that. And if they can't, or they won't, more likely, don't justify. So hold on to that empathy. That empathy is a good space, something you don't want to lose. But what you don't want to do is springboard into the justifying. A lot of people confuse the two. Anytime you're signing off on their bad behavior, justification. Anytime you're saying, wow, that does seem really hard, that sounds really hard, empathy. Understand the difference so you don't get fully pulled under that bus. It's remembering the good stuff, remembering the euphoric stuff. You know how that is. I mean, when we think back sometimes to parts of our past, believe it or not, sometimes, yeah, we can selectively pull out the bad stuff, but here's where it gets interesting. When we're in a difficult relationship, like a relationship you might be with a narcissist and you're not resolved about it yet, you're like, I know I can win this person over. I know I can get this right. I know I can make them see my point of view. No matter how many ups and downs and roller coaster turns and twists there are in this relationship, you still remain convinced that you can get this right. Those relationships, when they end or they're on a break, are very prone to something we call euphoric recall. That idea that you think back to the relationship and just remember the good stuff. Anyone who's been in a relationship with a narcissist can remember this. A lot of that good stuff is the love bombing stuff. You think back to those early months, like, oh my gosh, I remember that amazing night we had in New York. Or I remember we went to that restaurant and we stayed up all night. Or he left me 100 roses at my doorstep. Or got me this amazing gift. Or I met his friends. Or we had such amazing sex. And I'll never have that kind of sex again. It's so easy to get lost in that, to believe you'll never have that magical connection again. Euphoric recall. You keep going there and remembering it. And every time you do it, it really skews your vision. And you think, I just want that back. Think of it like chasing a high. And people who are addicts struggle with euphoric recall. They remember the highs when they're going through the ordeal of detox and the early months of sobriety. They remember what that line of Coke felt like. They remember what it feels like to be high, to have that loss of inhibitions, to feel on top of the world. That craving is often characterized by euphoric recall. So when people get out of relationships with narcissists, one thing that many of them report is the rumination. What could I have said differently? What did I do wrong? When he said that or when she said that, what did that mean? Why didn't they text? Who are they with? What if their next relationship is better? Well, they're going to have a great night in New York. They're going to get the roses now. The euphoric recall can be really difficult because now not only do you ruminate about it, but you think that, oh my gosh, somebody else is going to have this amazing experience now. One thing I often counsel clients to do, and we're going to have a series coming out probably in January, sort of a narcissist healing kit, as it were. One of the things I tell people is to make something called an ick list. An ick list is when you write down every single terrible thing that person did to you. Everything they said, every insult, every nasty text message, every invalidation, every person they cheated on with you, every lie they told, every manipulation they did, all the gaslighting. Trust me, it takes a few months. Put it down someplace you can find it, like your phone. I know it feels like a gross thing to do. But here's the thing. When that euphoric recall takes you over, you start thinking about the great sex, or the great night in Miami, or what a great dancer he or she was. Look at that list. Because your brain sometimes wants to protect you. It wants to protect you from so much awful. It's like, oh God, let's protect this poor person. We don't want him to really see it. So you remember some of that good stuff. It's, again, narcissistic relationships are quite unique in that regard. But in some ways, imagine you're an addict and maybe you need to keep seeing pictures of you passed out in a gutter, or lying in your own vomit, or getting arrested. Maybe those are the pictures you need to see instead of remembering how good it felt to be high. Same thing here. You need to see how bad it was. Because once you revisit that list, it might make you sick in a different way, but it may actually propel you to healing. Because it'll make you say, oh my God, I didn't deserve that, and that was awful, and I forgot that. I hate to say it because I'm all for people having positive thoughts, but I'm not a big fan of people having distorted thoughts. And only remembering the good times with a narcissist means that you're conveniently forgetting much of the picture. It's very common for people in relationships with narcissists to get really, really lost in the love bombing memories. They remember for 6 weeks, for 8 weeks, they felt like a prince or a princess. It was every fairy tale, every rom-com, everything they wanted to see in one place. And then at that point, they were willing to forgive anything. The love bombing period is often what fuels the euphoric recall. But another thing that fuels it too are the hoovering periods. You know the cycle of a narcissistic relationship. Love bomb, devalue, discard, pause, hoover, a little bit of love bomb, devalue, discard, hoover, wait, and so on and so forth. You know the cycle. Sometimes even the hoovering periods can be nice. Sometimes the hoovering periods are toxic, but sometimes they can be nice. But the fact of the matter is, the euphoric recall is your enemy. It makes the rumination worse. It makes you doubt yourself, and at this point now you're gaslighting yourself. Make that ick list. Remind yourself this was not pretty. Remind yourself of all the other stuff that happened. And every time you go to that sort of pseudo-happy place, take a look at that, and then you start taking care of yourself. Remember the fact that he wouldn't even let you cook with garlic, and then go cook up a storm. Remember the fact that he was against ever ordering white wine. Have that glass of white wine. Remember that he would laugh at you for wanting to make crafts during the holidays. Get a bunch of glue and have a ball. It's time to take your life back. Don't let euphoric recall turn your current life into one more form of gaslighting, into one more form of you denying your reality, into one more form of you attempting to make a rationalization, a false reality, and a false narrative to keep you in this relationship that held you back. Euphoric recall, not so good for you, especially with the narcissist. So let's talk about the fear of being alone. Fear is one of those things that explains a lot about narcissistic relationships. The fear of being alone, interestingly, is a key part of what a survivor of narcissistic abuse goes through. Being in a relationship with a narcissist is such a mind-twisting experience that you stop trusting yourself. In addition, relationships with narcissists can be so controlling that you can slowly lose confidence in your own abilities. Control in relationships with narcissists is something that is an often observed theme. The narcissists themselves are sort of obsessed with control. And their control means that over time, obviously, they have to run the show, and you may get robbed of the opportunity to make decisions in your own life. And there's a whole video in this series on indecision. So at one level, the fear of being alone may reflect some of the sort of dependency that the narcissistic relationship can bring up, and a false sense of inadequacy that without this relationship, you wouldn't be able to take care of yourself. So despite knowing that you are being treated horribly and recognizing the need for a change and wishing that all of this was different, the fear created by years of invalidation, gaslighting, dismissiveness, and just generally being diminished can leave you believing that you cannot function without the narcissist. And that's a rhetoric that the narcissist often shares, that you wouldn't be able to make it without them, and they'll push that in your face. People experiencing narcissistic abuse, although there may be a sense of relief when it's done, of not having to endure their narcissistic abuse anymore, there's also often the fear that after the relationship, you will be alone forever, that you will not be able to find another partner or another companion. And this fear can get magnified in people who believe that as they get older, that they will be less attractive as a partner, less desirable, etc. And that fear can leave some people just staying in their narcissistic relationship, or if they end up leaving, or their narcissistic partner should leave them, they may feel a sense of panic, anxiety, and euphoric recall. I should have never left that relationship. It really wasn't that bad. That kind of thing. If you are from a narcissistic family, the fear of being alone may be pronounced in scapegoats who always felt they were teetering on the edge of being cast out, but also a byproduct of the conditional love that is the narcissistic family. When it is conditional, it stands to reason that if you don't play by the narcissistic family rule book or playbook, they might let you go. They may not literally put you out on the street, but they may withdraw, withhold, and definitely psychologically abandon you. There can be a precarious sense that always floats around when you are in a narcissistic family system. A sense that your narcissistic parents could cast you out at any time. And because you never know exactly what they want or how to be enough, it can be a pattern of narcissistic abuse that trails you into adulthood. This fear of being alone can be something that predates the narcissistic relationship. But in most cases, this fear is exacerbated by the narcissistic relationship, or this fear comes up through you being in a narcissistic relationship. Many people have said to me that they were independent and strong, happy people, and then they got into this relationship, and years of manipulation, control, gaslighting, all of it turned them from a cheerful, self-reliant, independent person into a person who slowly felt more and more dependent on a partner who was unempathic and dismissive. The toxic combination of control, gaslighting, and devaluation can take you into a space in which you start to wonder if you can actually take care of yourself. Because in a narcissistic relationship, they are so good at fooling your friends and families. Not in all cases, but in not a small majority. The idea of leaving a relationship from a narcissist and striking out on your own can also feel potentially isolating and ramp up that fear of being alone, because everyone wonders why you are leaving and don't quite understand it when you tell them it's because of narcissistic abuse or gaslighting. So what do you do if you have this fear of being alone, secondary to narcissistic abuse? First, practice being alone. And that may be difficult because of your living arrangement or your partner's sense of control, and obviously because of the nature of the world these days. But if there's any chance for you to just be alone and see how it feels, then give it a try. But some of this can also sort of be done inside your head. Play it out in your head. What would it be like to come home to an empty house? To eat dinner alone? To watch TV alone? Imagine someday in the future having to go to events alone, sit at a friend's wedding alone, go to a party alone. There may be some feelings of anxiety, but go deeper now. Think about what it would feel like to not be criticized during dinner, or not be invalidated while you watch TV, or having to watch your partner either showing off at the party while they continue to invalidate you, or complaining about the party. Think that part through too. If you can envision that life of some sense of serenity and peace being alone, then you may be able to push back on that fear. And remember, you may not be alone forever. Number 2 is my tried and true favorite. I'm going to suggest therapy. Chip away at the core in therapy of what is fueling your fear of being alone. Years of being in a relationship in which someone is telling you that you are incompetent and who has invalidated and gaslighted you have left you so confused that you start to believe they're true. They're not, but you start to believe what they're doing and saying is true. If your choice is a manipulative relationship or being alone, I'm going to tell you right now, that's a no-brainer. From a mental health perspective, alone is always going to win. Number 3, I want you to consider support groups, online or otherwise, and someday maybe in person, but to bolster support and spend time with other like-minded people. Number 4, I want you to start doing something you enjoy, and ideally it's something that gives you and fills you with meaning and purpose. And this can include hobbies, volunteering, maybe trying to take on some new, maybe even more advanced responsibilities at a job, going to school or going back to school. The greater the sense of efficacy, which is a word, this feeling of, I feel like I can do this, I can accomplish this, that gives you a little more strength to push back on this fear of being alone. In essence, it gives you a resilience. Fear of being alone is something that may have plagued you before, long before this narcissistic relationship. In fact, your fear of being alone may be why you got into the relationship despite all the red flags, and why you stayed in it despite all of the red flags. But it may also be a byproduct of the narcissistic abuse in the relationship. You may have gone from independent to reliant and dependent simply within the context of this narcissistic relationship. And don't view the end of your narcissistic relationship, or maybe even distancing yourself from your family, as a sentence to always being alone. There's many people out there who believe my friends are more family to me than my family is. There are people out there who say, oh my goodness, I don't think I'm ever going to meet anyone again. I'll never be able to trust again. And lo and behold, they meet that person who compliments them. And they recognize that there's a huge difference between being in a narcissistic relationship and in a loving relationship. But as I said, there's almost a lot of single shaming in our culture. Oh, you're alone. What's wrong with you? There ain't nothing wrong with you. You're good. You are not withering in a narcissistic relationship. That already puts you ahead of the curve for overall. But the fact is that for a lot of people, being alone feels like a failure. It feels like an abandonment. It triggers a lot of old fears. And all of this fear of being alone, very, very much gets magnified within the context of narcissistic abuse. I hope that answers some of your questions. And listen, in the comments, those of you who may have left a narcissistic relationship, were alone for a while, and then ended up in a healthy, happy relationship, drop it in the comments, if for no other reason, to give everyone some sense of optimism that there is something on the other side of the struggle. Thanks again. Bye.